Izzy is more than good at striking, and barring his recent loss, is considered to be one of the best MMA and kickboxing strikers ever. Fundamentally, how does he do this? How does he hit stuff so good? What is he doing differently to other people? In this video, I'll answer all those questions and more. It'll be interesting as, so stick around. Elite level performance in fighting is an unlikely combination of several very specific factors. You need the right build, in particular limb length is very helpful, a good psychological base, like the ability to perform under pressure, and a lifetime of high quality diverse martial arts training from exceptional coaches. Now, Izzy has all of these, but arguably so do all of his competitors. What else sets him apart? There is another, less commonly discussed factor that matters just as much as the others that Izzy in particular excels at. This is, in the broadest possible sense, how you actually move, how you use the body that you have. If certain strategies just seem obviously better, like being able to hit well from both hands or being able to switch stances, why doesn't everyone do that? Why not counter-strike? Why not leg kick? Like, I get that people specialize, but why not specialize in the things that are the best or the most useful? Why instead do people specialize on arguably things that aren't that good? Because people, in the simplest possible sense, can't. They have strengths and weaknesses that are defined by the way they use their bodies. What they do with their mass, their center of gravity, and what they do with their muscles, how they support those positions at any given moment, in any given position. Pros don't ever really talk about this, and if they do, they say things like,
I think some people are truly born knowing how to fight.
They see it as a you have it or you don't type thing. It comes naturally to them, and so there's no real way for them to teach it. However, fortunately, I'm the opposite of a natural, and I've learned a little bit about how to move in my time. So in this video, I'll share what I know about Izzy's unique biomechanics, how he moves and strikes so well, and how maybe you can learn to do some of this too. I'll focus first broadly on striking itself, then talk more about how Izzy's unique strengths play into this or interact with this. In particular, counter-striking, distance management, feinting, stance and strike variability, and lastly, a little on not turning over punches. Okay, first up, in the broadest possible sense, striking. It's not enough to just put your fist or foot on the other person. You also need to apply force into them if you want the strike to be effective. And pulling your punches or kicks is an option. Like, sure, if you're hitting them, you're scoring points. Think someone like Marvin Vettori. But this is, relatively speaking, not effective striking in the purest sense. If it doesn't do damage and doesn't intimidate your opponent, it's going to be hard to win fights like this. To understand where this power in a strike actually comes from, we need to think about its possible sources. And there are really only two: gravity and muscle strength. But having big muscles and being able to generate large contractile forces in those muscles and striking power don't correlate anywhere near as well as you would think. Basically, if hitting hard was just about having really big muscles, the sport would be a lot simpler. However, take your average bodybuilder and get them to punch something and you'll be fairly underwhelmed. Get them to do it on a small moving target that's trying to hit them back and you'll basically have no whelm left at all. All you really need to do is look at guys like O'Malley knocking people out and realize that it's not about having big muscles, it's about moving big good. Setting the strike up and initiating it is about having the prerequisite position and stability needed to execute the strike. Basically, it's really hard to strike well from certain weight positions, like having your weight too far back on your heels or your weight being pushed back against the cage, or certain body positions, like being extremely bent or flexed in any given direction. On top of this, when setting up for a strike, you must have a support structure working in the opposite direction of the intended force direction of your strike. So basically, if you're moving something forwards powerfully quickly, you need some force going in the opposite direction to brace against that. Otherwise, the forces will just cancel each other out. And this is very similar as well to the moment of force application. In fact, the greatest requirement for stability and support is at the moment you're connecting with the other person in the strike. You need to be stable so that when you hit them, the force actually transfers into them. If you're an unstable structure, the forces will just not go into them, which is what you want to do. And this is helped a lot by things like momentum, literally being bigger. This is why heavyweights tend to hit harder. They just have a lot more mass, which kind of does some of this for free, but this alone isn't enough to strike well. This power is basically just a matter of, can you get the force moving in the direction you want it to go, and support it when you generate it and support it when it gets there. But if it's inaccurate or at the wrong time, it's also not very helpful. And all of these things are a complex combination of weight, body position, timing, and muscular support. Good striking meets all of these requirements, and bad striking is missing one or more of these. Okay, so that's some striking concepts, at least broadly covered. Let's look at how these interact with Izzy's particular strengths. Starting with counter-striking. Now, counter-striking is actually fairly rare in the sport and quite hard to do well. And why is that? The challenge is fundamentally this. You're reacting to what the opponent has done. You're evading them, moving out of the way, whether it be backwards, sideways, diagonally, or in Izzy's case, often bending into some very obscure looking shape. However, to effectively strike from this position has all of the striking requirements we previously discussed. The right stability and support and the right weight position. Being just as stable in such unique and awkward position is something physically that very few athletes can actually do. You cannot generate or transfer power if you aren't actually stable. If you're not in control of your position, if you're not connected, you can't strike. Doing this while moving in such awkward and unpredictable ways is just physically straight up a hard thing to do. Like, it's just not easy. And that's why you're not going to see someone like a Romero or a Costa doing this kind of thing, because they're just not physically good enough at moving to actually do it. The other thing that Izzy does in particular that works very well for counter-striking is counterintuitively, when he's being struck at, he isn't purely often moving backwards. He's either moving sideways, or even if some part of him is moving backwards, another part of him is moving forwards. You'll often see instances where his head or torso is retreating backwards, but his hips are still traveling forwards in space. To strike effectively, you can't be going pure back. It doesn't really work well. Even Izzy, if he's caught backing up too much, his striking will become ineffective. See the recent Strickland fight for an example of this. It's why forward pressure is so effective in fighting. And there's actually a lot of nuance in this. Like, part of you can be moving backwards, it's just all of you can't be. If your weight ends up purely on your heels and you only have backwards momentum, like, good luck striking. You can do a little bit, but it's just not going to be effective. Striking well means you need to be able to generate power through the big important muscle groups, glutes, hammies, lats, etc. And those posterior chain muscles really work so much better when you're forward on your balls of your feet and moving forwards. And other guys, when they're backing up, will often move backwards out of their own effective power ranges, out of their own ability to strike. This is why momentum in fights is such an obvious thing, because when people are purely defensive, purely retreating, they can't really counterattack properly. Now, people do this again because it's just physically really hard to do what Izzy's doing. Izzy really moves purely back. He's often moving something else forward at the same time to give him an opportunity to strike even from a defensive position. And again, often while you see people moving sideways if they can, because you're maintaining your power ranges better. And even when not counter-striking, Izzy utilizes this principle extremely well. When he's going to strike, whether it's through an arm or a leg, the first thing for him to move forwards always is his torso. He's getting his center of gravity moving first, and then the arm or leg or whatever comes next. And these are just snapping at the end of that chain of movement. They're not the thing initiating it. And this is actually one of the most distinctive elements of Izzy's striking that stands out to be the most compared to other people, is how well he does this. Everything starts with a forward torso movement. He's never starting with an arm. That's usually a sign that a punch is going to be ineffective. And this is part of what gives Izzy the illusion of being faster than I think he actually is. And it's not to say that Izzy isn't fast, but speed is about being where you need to be when you need to be there. Ideally before the other person knows what's going on. And Izzy often already has his weight, his center of gravity through his torso, going in the right place before he does any obvious striking movement, which allows him to strike and counter-strike faster than his opponents. And other guys will often get caught like this, needing to move the weight of their torso rather than having it already where they need it to be. And this just serves to make them look slower. People like Vettori and Costa are super guilty of this. Like, there's no doubt, for instance, that Costa can hit hard, but his weight is often just in the wrong place. It's like he's lagging behind. By the time he's moved it where he needs to move it to, it's already too late. The opportunity for the powerful strike is gone. And it's not to say that he couldn't get lucky and hit Izzy once, or Izzy couldn't slip up. But I think if they fought 10 times, Izzy would probably win 8 or 9 of them. This is about broadly the ability to move and how people move, not some easily reducible factor. Someone who takes a very different but also very effective approach here is someone like Strickland, who's constantly moving his weight forward. This can be a really effective strategy and option, unless you're going against someone with massive KO power, and then getting caught is always a risk. And this, as you can see, is kind of closely related to Izzy's general footwork and distance management. And you can really see this in, for instance, the Costa versus Izzy fight, where Costa just often ends up looking flat-footed in comparison because his weight is just getting stuck in places where it shouldn't be all the time, whereas Izzy's much more aggressively moving forward even when he's moving backwards. Like, his weight, his center of gravity is more central and stable, so he can move it where he needs to move it when he needs to move it. Related to this, but also interesting and different, are feints. Izzy is particularly known for his feinting, which is when you start a movement, make it look like you intend to finish the movement, making the person react to it, but not actually finishing the thing you're doing. This serves a lot of interesting strategical functions, but I think there are a few that I haven't heard people talk about that are super relevant. In many ways, it's the setup for the feint that matters, not the feint itself. Like the position you put yourself in to effectively be able to feint is through a weight shift. Like you don't need to move a hand or an arm or a foot to feint. Feinting is about giving the impression that you're about to start a strike. Faking the actual movement of the strike is the last thing that always happens. The thing is, pros, like they're good. They know what a real strike looks like and what precedes that real strike. Like pros aren't going to react to just a weak slap. They're going to react to something that looks like it really could be a strike. And these feints are really a considered action. Like unlike some of striking, which is just purely reactive, these feints are a considered action trying to provoke a deliberate response from the other person. It gives Izzy an opportunity to understand how an opponent will move when he does actually move, because he's seen the response already. But I think most interestingly and kind of unappreciated here is that he's actually saving himself setup time with these. I think he's often using the reactions from his opponent's feints to work them towards his goal, his outcome. It's basically this snake charming effect that he often seems to have on people. I think what Izzy has done is practiced reacting to people's reactions a lot, and has integrated these themselves into his practice combinations. Basically, he's trying to get people to move themselves into one of his punches. Like someone moving into a punch is going to experience much greater forces than someone just getting hit by one. Like think of a car hitting a wall versus a head-on collision of two cars. One's going to be a lot more explosive and saves Izzy a lot of work. And this again rests on the foundation of actually moving well. Like if your weight, and you're not good at moving your weight or your center of gravity, if it gets stuck and heavy, you can't do this. Izzy is also able to fight in both regular and southpaw stances. And many of the best fighters are able to do this. And this is because it's just a huge advantage being able to change if needed. Especially if your opponent is stuck using one, you can take the most advantageous response to that stance. Why then don't all athletes fight switch? Fundamentally because it's really fucking hard to do. Like, I don't know if you've ever tried to stand on a skateboard the other way. It feels about as awkward as that. Your pattern of moving, where you normally keep your weight and find stability, are all tied to your stance. And if the way you do that is not very good, not very adaptable, once you move to the opposite side, you're going to try and maintain the same weight balance and the same support patterns that you use on your regular sides, and they're just going to be ineffective because you need to alternate them when you're on a different stance. When fighting in the southpaw, for instance, if they're not naturally doing this, people often end up with much too much weight in their front foot, which just doesn't work at all. And they'll find support in all of the wrong places and just aren't able to effectively strike or generate forces from these positions. Izzy, however, gets it and can do both and generate force effectively from both stances. He can basically just move better. Think Costa versus Izzy again here. Costa is getting absolutely chewed up fighting regular. His front leg is trashed. He needs to switch stances, but he can't, so he doesn't. He doesn't switch because he drank too much wine the night before. He doesn't switch because he can't fight from the other stance. He's not able to effectively strike from here. Remember our prerequisites for effective striking? You have to be able to generate stability, and he just can't do it. Connected to this is Izzy's strike selection and variability. This fundamentally means using the appropriate strike for the situation, but also unpredictability and variability in striking. Having the ability to adapt and use different kinds of strikes seems obviously good, but many people don't do this. People tend to be known for their X, their right or their left or their whatever. Basically, whichever strike they're technically the best at doing. And pro fighters often have at least 1 to 2 very, very good strikes. But if they could choose to have all of their strikes just as good, I have no doubt that they wouldn't pick that option. Like if Powhatan could make his right as good as his left, I'm 100% sure he would take that option. And for the average person, left-right imbalances produce pronounced striking imbalances, but these imbalances also even show up in pro athletes, even in Izzy. It's just a question of degree. And these are profoundly influenced by our weight and support positions as they evolve in a fight. So for instance, let's say Costa is trying to strike with his right hand and he's ended up with too much of his weight on his left foot. From this weight position, he's just limiting the number of strikes and ways he can move this right shoulder blade. The right shoulder blade is involved in stabilizing when you're standing on a left foot. And because of its role stabilizing, when he's choosing which strike to throw, he's limited to his available options. And often in fights, it actually becomes down to a lot more what strikes are even available to throw rather than what would be ideal. Let's say in this example, Costa could get more weight onto his right foot more consistently. It would free up his right shoulder blade and allow the possibility for that strike if he needed it. It'll suddenly have a whole lot more literal available options with that shoulder blade. It can move more freely again. And people will literally do this. They'll walk themselves into situations where they have nearly no available striking options. Which I think really means that it's not actually correct, like why did they choose those strikes, but rather Why did they end up in the position where those were the only strikes left available to them? And Izzy often ends up with a much greater availability of strikes because he manages his weight and support so much better than many other fighters. He's very rarely ending up with stuck, awkward weight, preventing him from utilizing the best movement, the best strike available in any given context. So why do fighters fundamentally put themselves in the situation of only having one or two truly good strikes? It's because they're just not that good at other strikes. Like, to throw it in a fight, actually, you've got to be comfortable doing all kinds of diverse movements and finding the correct support and position for that movement. Let's look at a specific example. Let's say an uppercut. There are lots of different muscles that you could physically use to do an uppercut. You could use just your bicep, you could use your glutes, or you can do it through rotating through your waist. There's almost an infinite number of variations of ways to actually do an uppercut. The real skill is understanding that these are all totally viable options and being able to do all of them and being able to do them as required in a fight. And to be honest, this is an almost truly unknowable amount of information. You have to really feel this. When done well, this is like literal poetry in motion. Always being ready for the next thing, moving into setting up the next strike, adapting your position as required, all just naturally flowing without any internal dialogue or planning. So if we want to move towards this ourselves or learn this, what do we need to be actually practicing? Really, we need to be finding uppercuts or any strike, not from positions we feel comfortable and familiar with, but rather from unusual positions. To understand 1,000 different ways to throw an uppercut and to throw it well. This repetition, hopefully, will allow you to acquire mastery over the strike and throw it from wherever you need, whenever you need it. And most importantly, understand how to effectively support and where your weight needs to be to actually do this. We need to do this very mindfully and understand what a strike force actually is. Otherwise, we're just hitting stuff. Another interesting example that relates to this is Izzy's tendency to not turn over his punches when he's striking. This is fairly distinctive and needs a little explaining as to why he would do this. When thinking of punching, people typically think of it finishing with a horizontal fist, but Izzy will often end up with the thumbs up position. And this just comes back to what striking is. When you're striking, you're looking for the biggest, most effective hammer, the longest lever with which to most effectively apply the force in any given moment. And this really happens when we find the most effective power range for muscles. And different muscle groups have different power ranges that range in degrees of importance. So if we think about the muscles further us down the arm, like the forearm muscles, how much difference do we think the rotation of this forearm will ultimately have on the force applied to the person in front of us? The effect here is negligible at best. This power range doesn't really matter. And I think they do perhaps contribute somewhat in terms of accuracy of the strike. But I think if you're worrying about making sure the strike hits at the forearm level, you've probably made some mistakes further up the chain already. The most important power ranges to be found are in the muscles of the shoulder and upper torso. When Izzy is fighting, he isn't worrying about anything. He's just instinctively trying to find the biggest, most effective hammer to hit them with. He's focused on the power ranges of the big, important muscle groups around his shoulder and upper torso. He's aiming his strikes from here and generating his power here. The minor detail of forearm rotation just doesn't seem relevant in the scheme of him trying to do the thing he's trying to do. Why then do people ever rotate there? Why is this synonymous with striking, having the forearm turned over? I don't even know if it's necessarily the best. I think it's just what works most easily for most people, broadly speaking. It plays well into often typical shoulder imbalances that people have, the tendency to round forward. And some people aren't really even good at doing it any other way. It's just what comes naturally to them, and that sort of becomes the norm. To truly excel in striking, people need to naturally grasp these principles like Izzy has, or learn to understand them conceptually more deeply and remove limitations on what we think effective striking is or looks like. Robotically and mechanically hitting a bag, trying to look like Rocky or someone from a TV show from your most comfortable position is not going to make you a better striker. Striking well is an art form as diverse and deep as chess. It relies on an almost infinite range of positions, adjustments, and patterns of muscular support. Basically just moving real good. But if we remember right back to the start of the video, if you really do truly want to compete on an elite level, this video is probably not enough. You need a good build, good psychology, and a lifetime of high-quality, diverse martial arts training from exceptional coaches, and ideally to do everything we talked about here naturally. It's much better than having to learn it. So bear in mind, watching this video is not going to turn you into Izzy, but it's a good starting point if you do want to get a bit better. And Izzy, if you ever see this video, I'm in Auckland, hit me up. There's some stuff I'd love to work on you with. I won't call you out on specifics in case like Drickus or Hamza ends up watching this, but yeah. Also, if you guys are interested, I might do a wrestling/grappling breakdown at some point. Let me know if that's something you guys are interested in. Otherwise, thanks for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you're interested, I have lots of other videos on this channel that you could watch that are also good. And if you want to support this channel, the best thing you could do is just watch the whole video again. I get paid when you watch the video, so if you watch the whole video again, money in the bank, baby. Peace out.